All right. Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for sticking around after that wonderful talk there. I'm joined here by Gabriel Shipton. I'll call you a friend. Yeah, a friend, and an absolute freedom fighter, and just a gentleman. We're going to be talking a bit about using Bitcoin as a publishing tool. There's a lot of things that Bitcoin is. But certainly, maybe the most literal thing it is a database. And yes, it's a database that upholds very important monetary policy and all that, but it is a database. And one of the things that upholds the validation of these transactions, is this immutable ledger. And someone who understood that extremely early on, I would say, is Gabriel's brother, Julian, who has used Bitcoin for exactly this purpose for over a decade. So let's go back to that. Let's go back to that. Julian has talked very highly of Bitcoin before in the past, very specifically in regards to this ability to be a time-stamping tool and a publishing tool. Talk to us about how Bitcoin breaks Orwell's Dictum and why Julian, was able to understand this before really most people did.
Yeah, well, I guess, we have to go back, what is the Orwell's, dictum, his probably his most famous idea, as Julian put it, is he who controls the present controls the past, he who controls the past controls the future. And so you can see that happening all the time, these days, the sort of memory holding of historical facts or, on the online, sort of our online knowledge disappearing or changing or being manipulated over time. Back in the past, it was easier to, tell whether there's that famous photo of Stalin standing next to the river, and you see the people gradually disappearing for that photo. And in the past, it was very easy to, understand when those things were being manipulated. But in a digital world, it becomes, much harder to really understand and perceive when things have a slight change or are being deleted entirely. So. It was back in 2014 that Julian, said this, that Bitcoin breaks Orwell's dictum. And the way that it does that, of course, is by having this, immutable ledger, this database that you talked about that's decentralized, distributed, and can't be fucked with, essentially. And so at that time, WikiLeaks were putting hashes into Bitcoin transactions, and I guess we've seen that progress today with larger inscriptions that are happening now. So people publishing, whether it's art or information to the Bitcoin blockchain, and that information being distributed and unchangeable. So breaking the dictum.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's an interesting mechanism in regards to incentivizing data storage, where you have to incentivize someone to seed a torrent, and usually that's a sentimental incentive, and WikiLeaks, I think has understood this very well with their publishing of archives and using torrents, but obviously, of course, we need to continue to do that. How do you see Bitcoin? But as a monetary, instrument and as well as a database, incentivizing, us to hold and share this data that's been published.
Yeah, well, I guess, that's right. You have a torrent to exist. You need someone to seed it. Same with IPFS, needs to be held somewhere. But I think, if you look at Bitcoin, uncensorable money, and now uncensorable publishing, and binding those two things together, I think is, a really interesting concept. In that, the first thing that the first thing that forces come after is the money, right? Whether you're a dissident or a publisher publishing information that that the powers don't want out in the public. You saw that happen to WikiLeaks most famously when they switched to Bitcoin in 2011. But you're also seeing it very most recently, this year with publications like Mint Press and the Grey Zone having their PayPal shut down. Other examples, of course, is the truckers and things like that in Canada. But I think combining those two elements and sort of closing the loop really on publishing and also having that financial freedom and that uncensorable money, so that you have uncensorable publishing that is immutable and unchangeable, but also the means to continue publishing, continue paying, and continue operating through the uncensorable money of Bitcoin as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So the way I kind of look at the data market, there's a few types of data that you can have a market for, and I've said this in the past talking with Stella yesterday, but if you want information to be free in a very kind of hip contradictory way, you need to kind of give it a free market, and I think we're seeing this kind of interesting project that just launched, I think, earlier this week. That there's these anonymous activists putting previously declassified and published files that WikiLeaks released for the Afghan war logs, and we're seeing like a public mint, basically of a large amount of files. Can you talk to me about this? How do you see this kind of being integrated into a scalable, useful way for people to publish cables in a way that's durable and immutable and, of course, censorship resistant?
I think you're talking about Project Spartacus.
Yep.
Yeah. So I came across it a couple of days ago. Very interesting. Sort of framed as almost a moment of solidarity, to stand with Julian, to publish information, the information that he's actually been pursued for, been imprisoned for the last 4.5 years. I think the project invites people to, it's like a community archiving, right? Like they're inviting people to spend a little bit of Bitcoin publishing this information to the blockchain and doing the same action that Julian is being persecuted for, but also having this communal archiving effect of these documents. I don't think they're charging. I think it's just network fees that are applied. I don't think there's any additional charge or anything like that associated with the publishing. But in terms of I think it has that project has a sort of different, the economic incentive there is for people. It's a sort of activist incentive, right? Like it's asking to people, to stand in solidarity with Julian and publish that information. I guess that's where the Spartacus title comes from. It's that
I'm Spartacus.
Yeah, where everybody stands up and to protect the slave Spartacus when the Romans want to crucify him, and everybody exclaims, I'm Spartacus, and eventually you've got a whole valley of slaves standing up saying they're Spartacus, and they can't crucify Spartacus. But so I don't really know that there's an economic incentive sort of tied to that project. I think that'd be interesting if there was, and how you sort of do that, whether that's through speculation, whether it's tying it to using the ordinals protocol or something like that. But I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on.
Yeah, I mean, I have a ton. I'm lucky enough to know Casey, who came up with this idea, and he talked to me about it, for a while before it kind of blew up, and that was actually, I'm so happy to see this kind of thing, because that was something that I kind of thought would be really useful from the beginning. I'm a Bitcoiner. I don't really have any interest in the traditional NFT stuff. I don't own any ordinals, but I thought the the idea of, I think incentivizing is strange because you want to think it's innately you're getting paid to do this thing, but I think Casey did a really intelligent thing when he created this, where he basically forced you to have to sync a full node in order to be able to use the ORD index. And what that does is it just increases reachable node counts, and we've seen that very clearly, a huge increase in reachable node counts, and not just Bitcoiners that already have nodes that are going to go spin up 15 nodes in their data center or whatever, that they're really redundant, but like actually new significantly new economic nodes, which is kind of a strange term, but new people coming to Bitcoin that now have a use case where they want to run a full archival node. And I think that was a really genius idea, as sort of this psyop, basically, to convince a lot of the NFTers to come back home and come to Bitcoin, and not just do it in a way that you're just speculating on a token that's like an apparition of being connected to the main chain, but very literally you have to sync a full node to sort of take advantage of this protocol. And I think a project like what these guys are doing would be pretty useless if there wasn't a lot of reachable nodes. So I think there's a lot of stuff really built into the ordinal and inscription idea that's very aligned with I think a lot of the the work that WikiLeaks has done and Julian has done. I was curious if you were interested in talking about any of the previous work that he's done. I think so often people think of Julian as a publisher and a freedom fighter, and I think very often they forget he's an incredible cryptographer. I know a lot of you don't forget that, but I think a lot of people do. And of note, I thought, in kind of doing research for the Gatekeeper issue for Bitcoin Magazine print that we did, specifically this tool Rubber Hose. And I'll let you talk about it, but basically, this tool for encrypting data with specific passphrases that would basically, only decrypt part of the file. So if someone was under duress, they would be able to basically, fake that they're decrypting what the actual data is, and having an output that looks legitimate, but actually there's more data hidden in there. Did you have any comments on kind of his work as a cryptographer, anything that he's ever talked to you about that you think maybe a lot of us have forgotten?
Well, I think, if you look back through all of Julian's life, he's always, been looking for ways to increase justice in the world, right? Like whether it's, back when he was a teenager, he was, doing some, under Mendax was sort of doing some, sort of more hacking work and things like that. But later on, really looking at how to, get more information to people, and so people can make the right decisions about their situation or what they're doing, and looking at the tools available like encryption, and then eventually, the architecture of the internet and so on for WikiLeaks. But Rubber Hose, it was one of the early ones. I think it was around 2000 that was made. The title comes from Rubber Hose decryption, which is when you decrypt something by beating the crap out of somebody to get the password, essentially. And so that was the name of the title, and yeah, it was a layered encryption that really became the basis for further encryptions down the track, and it was so that people could get this information out. They could encrypt it. If they were being tortured, they could give one layer, and the information would not appear, but it would still be hidden in the subsequent layers. So, protecting sources, protecting journalists who are trying to get information out to the public, and how to use those tools to do it, I think was always how Julian thought. He's a problem solver in that sense. That was the forerunner to WikiLeaks. Basically, I think in Bitcoin Magazine, you've published, which is, I think, it's not called the white paper, the WikiLeaks white paper, but an essay that Julian wrote about conspiracies and how conspiracies operated, that they required secrecy to operate, and that if you increase the cost of secrecy within these conspiracies, that they would become more and more, less and less efficient, rather. And so it was those early ideas of how do we increase the cost of secrecy for these conspiracies. And when I'm talking about conspiracies, I'm talking about the conspiracy between government, between media, between the military or
the banks,
banks,
intelligence agencies.
And so what Julian did was he identified this problem and then went, well, how are we going to solve this problem? And that's what led to the creation of WikiLeaks. It was addressing this problem, making this tool that became a magnet for leaks. It was able to protect leakers with the anonymous Dropbox and the use of Tor. It used jurisdictional arbitrage in a sense of being able to, not to save on tax, but in a publishing sense, and being able to use the different jurisdictions around the world to keep servers up and keep the information alive, which was obviously before Bitcoin was up and running. This was in 2006, and so creating that system was really solving that problem, making this magnet for leakers where they could come and they could know that, okay, if we leak here, we know it's going to have the biggest impact possible. And so it started off slowly, but then, they started getting leak after leak after leak after leak, had 100%, they never made a mistake, which was also a very, very key part of publishing, is that you could reliably go to WikiLeaks and know that this information is correct information. And that just increased their reputation to a point where, anything that appeared on WikiLeaks became, worldwide news and, changed the world essentially, which is why Julian is in prison today.
Absolutely. Everyone should read Conspiracy as Governance. I honestly think it's one of the most important pieces of writing for navigating the world we're in right now. And I think one of the most important the things that just resonated with me about it is that, well, first off, conspiracy, theorist is a phrase that has been perverted by intelligence from the United States after, the assassination of JFK to dissuade people from ever putting any of these things together. We need to take that word back. But I think a big part of that, of the piece is that, these conspiratorial agents that are working against the people are unified in very, usually financially incentivized ways, but they're unified. And I think he kind of flips that and inverts it and uses their inversion back on them to say that, no, we need to do that as well. And we need to come together to push back against a unified coalition with our own unified coalition. And so with that said, what are things that, the Bitcoin community specifically, and dissonance, here in this room, what can we do to continue Julian's work and to help him in this time of need? What's the best thing that we can do right now?
Yeah, I was thinking about this. I mean, I mentioned those two outlets before who had their PayPal cut off, Grey Zone and Mint Press, and that's becoming more and more common. And really, I'd love to see more Bitcoiners, reaching out to these organizations and showing them, okay, you can switch to Bitcoin. There is support for your organization that we're going to give, and really, use this example that Julian said as Bitcoin as really uncensorable money, and putting that into practice for news organizations that. Or reporting or journalist organizations that are coming under attack. I think that would be, that's something that I would personally like to see Bitcoiners doing more and more of. But just, in terms of Julian's case, just keep talking about it, keep talking to your friends, keep educating yourself with good information on the case and passing that around. I think that's really key. The Bitcoin community, I spent a lot of time with, over these last few years, and always impressed by where you find Bitcoiners. Like if you're, I do a lot of political work and in the halls of power and things like that, and you always come across a Bitcoiner somewhere or other. And so, using those connections to really push Julian's case, I think is important as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I know that we were presented with the option of maybe asking some folks in the audience if they had any questions. I already got a hand, so that's great. Do we got a microphone for our friend in the front row here? I can run it out. If not, I can toss. I got a wicked right hand. We're just going to do this. How about that?
Hey guys, thank you for coming here and speaking to us. One of the questions I had, you mentioned minting with respect to using it as sort of like a ledger for publication, getting all the information out there. I think WikiLeaks would be a great thing for ordinals to kind of like, set that in. But the fees is really a problem. How do we kind of like, do you think there's like, what's your vision of the solution? Like, how do we go about lowering your fees? So I think there was like Moby Dick or War and Peace or something that was published on an ordinal. How do we kind of combat that so there's more adoption?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, it's it's not the most scalable use case for Bitcoin, obviously. But there are a lot of methods, that can be done. There's actually some interesting stuff about to come out for text compression, which I think is, one of the criticisms I might have of the project that, just like looking at it is, using these SVG files. Maybe not as efficient as if they just use text files, right? I think it's a really beautiful thing, very pretty, but we could probably much more cheaply put a lot of data in there if we use compressed text files. But at the same time, I think it's really new tech. When Bitcoin Magazine did the cover for the Gatekeeper issue, we did the biggest Bitcoin transaction ever, a little over 4 megabytes, to kind of put his face in a whole block, and something like that. Maybe I shouldn't say this, but I think it cost. It was a lot. It was a lot. And then when we did our next magazine, the withdrawal issue, we did a sort of a recursive collection. So we went from 4 megabytes, that was like almost like 10 grand a megabyte basically, to the withdrawal issue, which was over 11 megabytes, and it was under like $7,000. So there's absolute ways to spread these transactions and this data over multiple blocks, to sort of take advantage of or of a dynamic fee market and keep it low. Buying a whole block is a very stupid and inefficient thing to do. Also very cool. I'm glad that we did it. But and also that, transaction can't be propagated as well. You have to kind of do it out of band. So I think there's a lot of efficiencies that we will see, especially with data files. But yeah, I mean, I think, like the collateral murder video wouldn't have made any sense to try to inscribe on Bitcoin. But there's other ways to do it, hashes or, magnet links, Peter Todd's, like, open timestamps. There's certain other ways to stuff data in there that, without actually putting literally all the bits in there. So I think we should just let the devs cook a little bit and see what they can get up to. But yes, of course, I mean, scaling is a serious concern for using Bitcoin in that way. Any other questions? Maybe time for one more. Anybody? We got one in the back there. Great question. Thank you so much. And sorry, I kind of just took that one. I hope that was okay.
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah.
Hi. Do you think the impact of WikiLeaks has diminished because of what's happened to Julian? And if you do, how can we reboot the impact of WikiLeaks without a centralized figure at its helm?
Yeah, interesting. Interesting question. I don't. I think what's happening. Like I was sort of alluding to this earlier, but what is happening to Julian now is basically a function of the impact that WikiLeaks had. That those powers that Julian exposed, these conspiracies that Julian exposed, are now so afraid of this tool and of this ever happening again that they are, basically they're holding Julian. They're breaking all their own rules. They're corrupting all their own institutions in order to keep Julian in prison, and that's sort of a function of of the impact that WikiLeaks has. So I don't, often talk about Julian's persecution as a it's almost like another exposure of the corruptness of these powers and the lengths that they will go to stop us finding out these sorts of information. And then what's happening to Julian has really sent, I think, has had a real chilling effect. I've seen it in the Bitcoin community. People are really scared. People are really afraid of even supporting Julian, with their Bitcoin, because they are afraid that they will be next. And so there is that angle of a chilling effect. I've seen that firsthand in the Bitcoin community, but also within the press and within the publishing community as well. There is a real fear out there that what's happening to Julian could happen to anybody, and that's why you've seen these publications from Der Spiegel in Germany to the New York Times, all writing to the US DOJ asking them to drop these charges. But in terms of the legacy, Julian's legacy that's continued on, these conspiracies that he identified, that he identified, they've been totally disrupted. You've seen mainstream media their audience has been in decline for the since WikiLeaks basically came about, and you've seen this this explosion, this massive blooming of independent journalism, and different sources all coming out. You've seen the proliferation of the anonymous Dropbox that WikiLeaks pioneered, and that legacy continues on. And I think one interesting independent journalists, one interesting application, I think, and sort of addressing this fee question as well is, independent, you've got things like Substack, where you pay a subscription and that information is published. You could have a similar sort of situation where people paying for their subscription in Bitcoin, and instead of publishing to a Substack website or an email, then you're publishing to the Bitcoin blockchain. So I think that's one way of addressing that fee structure, is having those subscriptions from readers, from actual people who want to read this information. But yeah, I think sorry if I hope that answered your question.
Yeah, no, it's great. I mean, the impact is it comes in waves, and I think we're seeing a huge wave of people being interested in the things that were exposed, and I think I think the revolution is very much so an internal, inward thing, and I think we have to take a lot of self-responsibility. I think it's on us to make sure, we all are very aware of the incredible work that WikiLeaks has done. How many of us are seeding these files? How many of us are actually going through them and looking at them and seeing what's actually in there? How many of us are going through the Bitcoin blockchain and looking at all the things that were stuffed in there in 2014? How many people are building the tools to efficiently deal with the fees of stuffing things into Bitcoin? I know that I wouldn't be here today if not for the leaks that were presented, specifically the Podesta file leaks. That was the thing that really pulled the veil away, that made me realize that there's some really fucked up things going on. We need to take it very seriously. I don't believe Julian's work is even close to being done, and I don't think his impact is even close to being done. And his legacy is yet to be finished. So thank you so much for joining us. Thank you, Gabriel.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Free Assange.
And free Julian Assange.